Hello, this is Jeff Neville for Selective Imagery. This video is titled Thanks for the Memories. It's going to be a look back at a few vintage cameras along with some historical facts. In a second here, you're going to see an image of an Argus model A2B that was made in 1950. And we'll look at some more pictures of this camera in a minute, but I'm going to give you a little bit of history about Argus cameras and how it all began. So let's proceed to that. The story of Argus cameras actually starts with radio. In 1929, an inventor named Charles Verschoor and the mayor of Ann Arbor, Michigan started a radio manufacturing business which was called International Radio Corporation, IRC. They obtained financing from local banks and investors, and in 1932 they produced a radio called the Cadet, and it used tubes instead of a large transformer. They made many products out of a new material at the time that they were very good at manufacturing and using, called Bakelite. In this time in history, radio sales dropped during the summertime as other outdoor activities, attracted people to do other things such as going to the beach, going on vacations, visiting family members, that type of thing. So people weren't buying radios. There was no portable radio at that time. So they weren't buying or listening to radios inside the house because they were doing outdoor activities. So what happened was Verschoor wanted to find other products to manufacture to take advantage of his knowledge of using Bakelite and radio technology or what have you. He wanted to keep the local workers busy. He didn't want to have to lay anybody off. So he went and traveled to Europe researching the idea of producing a camera like a Leica. But he wanted to make a camera that could be manufactured and sold for about $10. Now, Argus initially became a subsidiary of IRC, and resulting from a patent received in 1936, they created its first Argus A rangefinder Bakelite bodied 35mm camera. It sold for $12.50. A Leica A was over $200. The Argus A camera progressed into a group of about 8 different models over the years, and the word Argus is derived and named after a mythical god of 1,000 eyes. How appropriate. Now, Argus is credited with really bringing 35mm film in the Kodak 135 cassette to the mass market in the United States. This was movie film at the time, and the Leica cameras and other European and foreign-made cameras at the time used this film, but it had not caught on in anything in the United States. So really, the Argus camera is why 35mm film became popular in the States. Now, all of the Argus products were made in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And at the height of the manufacturing of that company, they had about 1,300 employees, and they occupied buildings that took up 2 city blocks. The Model A was so popular that it sold 30,000 units through Montgomery Ward in the first week of being out there for sale. The camera business was so good that the radio business got sold off so that they could focus on camera manufacturing. Now, the Argus A model, it wasn't a copy of it, but it was very, very close feature-wise to the Leica A. But it sold in way more quantities because it was so much cheaper. Now, the image that you saw earlier of my A2B model was made in 1950. Now, I feel it's in working order. With that particular camera, if the lens will retract into the body, partly anyway. When it's retracted, your focusing range is 6 feet to 18 feet. Now, if you twist and pop out the lens, then your focusing range changes from 18 feet to infinity. Now, this info isn't marked anywhere on the camera, so if you're new to that camera and you don't realize that, oh, I'm taking something 30 feet away, and you forget to pop the lens out, then you're going to have a bunch of rotten images because they're just not going to focus. So unfortunately, that was a mistake. They should have had some kind of markings on the camera. Now, the A2B had what they called an extinction meter with an exposure calculator. And believe it or not, it's a fairly complicated mechanism, I guess you'd call it, for determining what your exposure should be. And I'm not going to get into how to use it. I'd actually have to pull the manual out and refresh my memory at this point. But if you're going to use a camera like that today, you're just going to use a handheld meter, and you're going to adjust your f-stop and your shutter speed accordingly. Now, we'll go back and look at a few more pictures of this particular model, and I'll talk about it. And then we'll continue on with a different model of Argus camera. Looking at the front of the camera, you see a lever on the top above the letter R in Argus, and that's your shutter speed area. You have a 25th of a second, 50th, 100th, 150th bulb and time mode. And underneath you have another slider, which is for your f-stops, f4.5, 6.3, 9, 12.7, and 18. So that's what you have on the front, along with the shutter release lever. That's to the left. This is the back of the camera. You have a strap on the left-hand side that you would grab. You would depress a button on the left-hand side when looking at it from the rear, and you would pull this strap and the whole cover would come off, exposing where you would put in your 35mm cartridge. And there's no foam in this camera. The tolerances are so tight, it was light tight without having foam that you would have on future 35mm camera bodies. Now here's a view looking at the top of the camera, and starting on the right-hand side, you have a numbered dial that indicates how many exposures you have taken. Below that, you have a hexagonal shaped button. When you push down on that and you turn the knob on the far left, you push the button down, you turn that knob slightly and let go of the button, and you keep turning the knob until it doesn't move anymore, and then you have advanced the film for the next shot. And that's how you do that. And the little table on the top and the little aluminum slider is your exposure calculator, which we're not going to get into talking about that. That's a whole discussion on its own. But that's the camera. Beautiful Bakelite body with a little bit of trim, and very affordable at $12.50. In 1938, the Argus C and Argus C2 rangefinder cameras were introduced and affectionately nicknamed the Brick due to its shape and weight. The C3 model was made from 1939 till 1966 and reportedly sold at over 2 million units. It was made from Bakelite and metal castings along with some metal trim. It utilized interchangeable lenses, and the base lens was a Cintar 50mm f3.5 lens. Lenses were made under contract with Bosch and Lomb and Graph Optical, which was taken over by Argus in 1939. The Argus C3 shown in this picture was made in 1948, appears to be in excellent working condition. I plan to test it out in the near future. Argus unfortunately went out of business in 1969, because they really couldn't keep up with the Japanese cameras that were coming out at that time. It was just, they were just too technologically advanced. When you're looking at the front of the camera, starting from left to right, you have a shutter cocking lever on the far left, and above that you have the rangefinder dial, which is used for focusing, and then you have a gear that goes between that and the lens. So as you rotate the rangefinder dial, you're actually adjusting the focus of the lens. Then going across the top, you have a rangefinder window, which when you look through that and you're adjusting the focusing, it's like a split image where you try to line everything up. The viewfinder window is to the right of that, followed by the shutter speed dial. The lens has two nubs on the front of it that you can, get your finger in there and rotate the f-stop along the scribed line to change what your f-stop is. So that defines the front of the camera. So here we're looking at the rear of the camera, and dead center you have an ASA film speed dial that doesn't actually do anything electronically or anything with the camera. It's just like a reminder. You rotate it so you can indicate what speed film that you have in the camera at a glance. The release for the door is to the left, like the previous camera. You push it and then the door opens up, but in this case the door does not fall off. It's actually hinged, which is much better. And those two windows you have at the top, the one on the far left is your viewfinder window. The one on the right of that is the rangefinder window, where that's where you're looking through and adjusting the rangefinder focusing wheel on the front and aligning the split image up. And so that explains the back. And once again, there's no foam seals or anything in this camera either, just like the previous model. Everything is light tight. Here we are looking at the top of the camera, kind of similar to the previous model. Going from right to left, you have your shutter release button, and then it has a collar around it that you twist, and you either have it on the letter I or B. The I is for instantaneous, and you use that when you're adjusting shutter speeds and using the shutter speed dial. You put it in B mode if you're going to use bulb, and basically if you're in bulb mode, you push the shutter release and the lens will stay open until you let go of the shutter release button, and then that'll be that. To the left you have your numerical number dial, which is your showing you how many exposures you've taken with the camera. And then you have what they call a film catch, that hexagon shaped button, and you push that down momentarily, turn the wine lever, quarter turn, let go of it, keep turning the wine lever until it stops, and then you have advanced the film to the next for the next shot. And then of course you have to remember to push the lever down on the front to cock the shutter. And that explains the functionality of the top of the camera. The Argus C3 was an interchangeable lens camera. Here's a few pictures of the Argus Tele Sanmar 100mm f4.5 lens, and this is amazing. Look at the size of this. Don't you wish you could have a 100mm lens on a typical 35mm camera nowadays? It's this small. Simply mind-boggling. Metal lens caps too. This particular camera, Kodak Pony IV, was my mom's, and it was the first camera I ever used that utilized 35mm film. My mom was not only the photographer / videographer in my family, but she provided many a picture to her brothers and sisters over the years of their children as well. She had a Brownie 8mm movie camera with the light bar that you could fry eggs on, and it seemed brighter than the sun itself as it shined in your face. I learned to use Polaroid land cameras that she owned, and as the years went by, Kodak Instamatic cameras and more. So thanks, Mom, for providing a great environment to catch the photographic bug. Getting back to the camera, it was made between 1957 and 1961. I was born in '59, but don't tell anyone. It utilized a fixed lens Kodak Anastar 44mm f3.5 lens and originally cost $40 US. It had shutter speeds that went from 1/30th of a second to 1/250th, plus a bulb mode. It had an exposure chart that fit onto the back of the camera and gave you exposure values to set on the camera based on lighting conditions. The top of the lens looking down had shutter numbers and a lens opening number, which could be set in any combination as long as the sum of the two numbers equated to the exposure value. If you turned the camera upside down, you would see the corresponding f-stop values and shutter speed values that resulted in a particular EV. Many cameras of this era and earlier used exposure values as a way of setting the camera. This is the Minolta AL-F 35mm rangefinder camera, circa 1967. I recently purchased this camera because I was always a fan of Minolta cameras and owned several 35mm Minolta SLRs during my youth. I never had a rangefinder camera, and I thought it would be fun to try one out. This particular camera was back in the mercury battery age, so it took a bit to find a current style battery that would work, which I did. It has a hot shoe on the top of the camera and has automatic mode for flash that Minolta used to call Easy Flash, and the lens actually had a guide number selector. The framing viewfinder is coupled to a superimposed rangefinder, and it's a split screen type of focusing system. The CDS exposure system displays an aperture value proposal on the right-hand side of the viewfinder when you're looking through it. The camera is shutter priority. The meter's eye was placed within the filter ring on the lens, and you can see a round circular metering eye in the center top of the lens when you look at it from the front. I currently have a roll of Fujicolor 200 in the camera ready to try out. As it appears that everything is working fine, the exposure meter matches up within an acceptable tolerance of my handheld incident light meter, so I'm all set to take some pics down the road and check it out. This is the last camera I'm going to talk about. This is a picture of a Rolleiflex 3.5B MX-EVS twin reflex camera 6x6, circa 1954 to 1956. This was a risky purchase for me. Many of these cameras sold used obviously do not have a warranty. There are plenty of things to worry about. Slightly newer models using selenium cell exposure meters typically don't work or are inaccurate in this day and age. This model does not have a light meter, so you either use the Sunny 16 rule, you calculate your exposure value using the table on the rear of the camera body, or in my case I'm going to use a handheld incident light meter and determine my f-stop and shutter speeds with that. This particular model that I own utilizes a Schneider Xenar 75mm f3.5 lens. About 94,000 of this particular camera were sold between 1954 and 1956. I wanted to see if I could find one of these that was in working order, and after some hefty cleaning of both the taking lens and the viewing lens, along with cleaning of the mirrors and focusing screen, I thought I was all set, but the shutter would stick at slower shutter speeds. I was able to fix this and went out to try a roll of Ilford HP5 Plus 400 black and white 120 film. My friend Bob from Bob R Photos was kind enough to develop the negatives for me, shoot the negatives on a light board with a digital SLR with a macro lens, did some software editing, and sent me the files. I tweaked them a little bit further in Lightroom, and will share a few with you in a few minutes. The camera worked great. I'm thrilled with this purchase and chose 3 images to make 12 by 12 prints out of, which I have since framed. I have almost 2 rolls of Kodak Tri-X 400 black and white film to send out shortly. Shooting with this camera is an experience, and believe it or not, a welcome change to a high-tech Z9 mirrorless camera. It's more about the experience and being forced to take your time, and given the cost to do everything and only having 12 shots per roll, you are more selective of your subject matter, that's for sure. I was fortunate enough to get an original Rolleiflex bulb type with this camera, and once I can find a very old style battery, which I think I did, I ordered something today that I think should work, I'll try it out. My friend Bob shoots with an old Yashica twin lens reflex camera and is having a great time shooting with it. Now we both can get out and shoot subjects together with our TLRs. We'll go through this camera really quick. When looking at the front, we'll look at the 2 lenses. The one at the top is the viewing lens. The one at the bottom is the taking lens. And below the taking lens, you have your shutter button on the left, and it has like a little swing arm under it that you can use to lock the shutter release so you can't accidentally take a picture. To the right of that, you have a sync port labeled M and X, and you swing an arm to select what mode you want. The M mode is for flash bulb type flash units. The X mode is for electronic flash units. Between the viewing lens and the taking lens, you have 2 small round dials. The one on the right is for adjusting your f-stop, and the one on the left is for adjusting your shutter speed. And on the dial on the left, you can see some numbers on there, and those are exposure value numbers in case you're going to be setting up the f-stop shutter speed combination to achieve a certain EV value. But nowadays, I don't care about that. I'm just going to be using an incident light meter, and I'm going to determine my lighting and what I need to set my f-stop and my shutter speed to, and I'm just going to go and do that. The little button to the right of the viewing lens is a self-timer. Now on the side of the body of the camera, on the right hand side, is your focusing knob, and obviously this is a type of camera where you hold it basically the middle of your chest type of height, and you flip up the hood and you're looking down at a piece of ground glass, and you focus until the image looks sharp using that focusing knob. Looking at the left side of the camera, you basically just have your focusing knob, which is a large knob, and then you have a plate there that has the f-stops. So once you set your f-stop, you can look at that plate and you can determine what your depth of field is by looking at what's on the knob against the aperture designations on the plate. The 2 smaller knobs are just for the quick release knobs for your take-up spool and for the mechanism that holds your film in place. In the middle of the focusing knob, when you're looking straight at it in this image, there's just a raised area that you can grip and rotate to adjust what your ASA or DIN number is for your film, and also set what type of film type you're using. And that's not so much relevant anymore, but it's just a reminder thing. It doesn't actually change anything in the camera. The back of the camera just has a plate that is a guide to help you determine what the exposure value is based on the scene and your film speed. And like I said, it's not so much useful anymore in today's day and age when you're going to use an exposure meter anyway, but it's there if you want to really go old school. On this side of the camera, you see the number 9. It shows I'm on my 9th picture. Once I release the shutter and I need to advance the film, I'll lift that crank up, rotate it clockwise until it goes to the number 10. Then I will actually rotate it counterclockwise until it goes no further to get the shutter cocked and ready to go again. And then I fold the handle back down. And that's about it. I'll share a few pictures here and we'll conclude. Here are just a few images. This is one underneath the pier at Myrtle Beach State Park. This next one is also a view of the pier, but shooting through some grasses. You see people on the beach and you see the pier in the distance. This shot is from the top of the pier, which, you know, a lot of fishermen are up there fishing, and this is just shooting across along the coastline. And last but not least, I have to have a picture of my dog Patches in my backyard. I used to own over 300 cameras, although the majority were from tag sales. I'm sure most of them were not in working order. I got rid of them years ago. I plan to slowly grow a collection again with the purpose of trying my best to find working models of what I buy, or some that I can fix without too much trouble. We shall see what I find. And as I say, enjoy life, capture some of it, whether it's with a 1950s or older era camera, or the latest and greatest in mirrorless technology. They all have their place and offer a unique photographic experience. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. I would greatly appreciate it. Until next time, take care.